hello, Internet.
And hello, world at large. How are you doing today?
And hello, any consistent viewers that we have, because welcome back. It's lovely to have you.
And hello there, Lies.
Hello, Scandal. So we are Lies and Scandal, and this is our Let's Play channel, and we haven't been to Fern Flower for a little while. It was actually one of our first videos, and one of our most popular videos, even as we were trying to figure out how to play it. And it took me a while to figure out the whole meridian control system, where if you're tapping on this half of the screen, you're going one way, and if you're tapping on that half of the screen, you're going the other. So it's not just directional of tap over here or on the other side of the character, it's really the other side of the screen, and I've fought with that a lot. I am very proud that that video has done so well. I didn't expect it to do that well, but we had a very fun, sort of genuine time just playing around with this game and going, what the heck is this game? And falling a lot. There was a lot of falling.
'Tis the endless faller.
Was the endless faller. We fell so much. So thank you to everyone who had patience with that. That was lovely. But this time we're not going to be talking about this game. I'm just going to be using it as a sort of a background set piece as we read more of The Magicians by Lev Grossman.
Ah, yes, and it is I, Scandal, who's going to read it to you again.
Who is going to be doing the reading again. Scandal does lovely performances.
Aye. Scandal also doesn't die.
Nope, Scandal dies all the time. And I won't be doing any continues in here visually because I don't want to break it up with loud commercials or anything like that. I just kind of want to have this soft background to what we're doing. And again, in most just in like all of our grinding casts, I guess, it's a podcast connected with just some sort of essentially mindless or skillful, but, you know, long-term grinding activity. Right now I'm trying grinding cast. You have a lot of grinding in a lot of video games where you're working your way up to something that honestly isn't necessarily super interesting for everyone to watch, but is very important to advancing the game. So I'll be doing some of that grinding while Scandal reads us this book. If you want to read the first chapter, which we're also going to be live blogging slightly and critiquing as we go along, it's connected to
Emerge Dragons.
To no, Zenkoi.
It was a Zenkoi.
It was Zenkoi. To Zenkoi 2.
Yep.
So you can go and look that up. It's clearly labeled on our channel. And please join us for chapter 2 of The Magicians, labeled
Break Bills.
Here we go.
Oh, and content warning, there is actually a lot of either sex or sexuality or discussions of violence or... this is not an immature book, as I would say.
It is a book at least for teens.
At the very least. Alright, Break Bills. He didn't laugh. He didn't laugh. Because my nose just went...
Snort. He didn't snort.
He didn't laugh. Quentin would appreciate that later. Upstate? Quentin said. What? Like, the Tsar? I saw you come through, the young man said. Come on, you need to go up to the house. He snapped the cigarette away and set off across the wide lawn. He didn't look back to see if Quentin was following, which at first Quentin didn't, but then a sudden fear of being left alone in this place got him moving, and he trotted to catch up. The green was enormous, the size of half a dozen football fields. It seemed to take them forever to get across it. The sun beat on the back of Quentin's neck. So, what's your name? The young man asked in a tone that made sure Quentin knew that he had no interest in the answer. Quentin? Charming. From? Brooklyn? How old? 17. I'm Elliot. Don't tell me anything else. I don't want to get it. I don't want to know. Don't want to get attached.
Don't want to get attached. It's terrible to get attached.
I hate getting attached. Quentin had to take a couple of double-timed steps to keep up with Elliot. There was something off about Elliot's face. His posture was very straight, but his mouth was twisted aside in a permanent half-grimace that revealed a nest of teeth sticking both in and out at improbable angles. He looked like a child who had been slightly misdelivered, with some subpar forceps handled by the attending. But, despite his odd appearance, Elliot had an air of effortless self-possession that made Quentin urgently want to be his friend, or maybe just be him, period. He was obviously one of those people who felt at home in the world. He was naturally buoyant, where Quentin felt like he had a dog paddle constantly, exhaustingly, humiliating, just to get one sip of air.
This is an interesting difference between the book and the TV series, where they made Elliot hot in the series. They didn't go for
See, the thing is I was very confused because I didn't find Elliot attractive in the slightest. Elliot seemed like he was young and snobby and really just kind of dull and boring and average and everyday. Like, I am supposed, like, he fits that stereotype of he's trying to be, but he was too average looking and too...
See, visually, he's painted as the hot character with his clothing and with his demeanor, and the actor is not bad looking. He's not my style, but he has your traditional, attractive appearance markers. He's slim and fit. He's got a well-formed face. He's got a jawline for days.
Pretty much, except he kind of doesn't. He looks a little bit like he's more of that effeminate
Maybe.
thing, because I feel like what they were trying to go for, spoilers, is that he's very gay.
Queer baiting?
We are actually queer baiting.
At any rate, I found it interesting that he sounds really interesting looking in the book. Like, his personality absolutely carries his appearance, and the fact that he's slightly, deformed, if you will, or, misshapen, is actually adding to his character, because he's sort of like, you know what? I have such a cavalier attitude about this that I am the best thing in the world, that you will believe me that I am the best thing in the world.
Fantastic. Yep.
I am so glorious, this doesn't matter, and is actually a point of character on me.
And pretty much he is this thing either despite it or in spite of it.
Yep.
Alright. But despite his odd appearance, whoops, hang on. So, what is this place? Quentin asked. Do you live here? You mean at Breakbills? He said airily. Yes, I guess I do. They had reached the far side of the grass, if you can call it living. Elliot led Quentin through a gap in the tall hedge and into a leafy, shadowy labyrinth. The bushes had been trimmed precisely into narrow branching, fractally ramifying corridors that periodically opened out into small shady alcoves and courtyards. The shrubbery was so dense that no light penetrated through it, but here and there a heavy yellow stripe of sun fell across the path from above. They passed a plashing fountain here. Plashing. That's interesting.
It was flashing. There's some interesting language in here.
There is. It's a very interesting array of them, actually. Ooh. A plashing fountain here. A somber, rain-ravaged white stone statue there. It was a good 5 minutes before they stepped out of the maze, through an opening flanked by two towering topiary bears reared up on their hind legs onto a stone terrace in the shadow of the large house Quentin had seen from a distance. A breeze made one of the tall, leafy bears seem to turn its head slightly in his direction.
Because topiaries would never be animated. That trope is way too used.
That sounds unrealistic.
Sounds fake.
Sounds very fake. The dean will probably be down to get you in another minute, Elliot said. Here's my advice. Sit there. He pointed to a weathered stone bench, like he was telling an overly affectionate dog to stay, and try to look like you belong here. And if you tell him you saw me smoking, I will banish you to the lowest circle of hell, which I've never been there. But if even half of what I hear is true, it's almost as bad as Brooklyn. Elliot disappeared back into the hedge maze, and Quentin sat down obediently on the bench. He stared down between his shiny black interview shoes at the grey stone tiles, his backpack, and his overcoat in his lap. This is impossible, he thought lucidly. He thought the words in his mind, but they got no purchase on the world around him. He felt like he was having a not unpleasant drug experience. Not unpleasant drug experience. That sounds very mundane, weird, like, oh yeah, I know the weed. The thing where you have the joint and the drug experience, you know? Like,
I totally know what a boob feels like.
I have the titty experience.
I have had the drugs. Yes, I too have done the drugs. You bet. I am hip with the lowdown and much kids.
I'm literally like, the drug experience? Like, the not unpleasant drug experience? Like, come on.
Like, not unpleasantly high or not unpleasantly drug experience?
Like, okay, not unpleasant drug experience. What?
That's so generic.
I really am like, huh? Especially with everything else, that seems wildly out of place. Anyway, the tiles were intricately carved with a pattern of twiny vines, or possible elaborately calligraphic words. Calligraphic?
I guess.
Calligraphic?
Calligraphic.
Calligraphic words that had been worn away into
illegible.
Ileligibility. I can't say it because Ileligibility. I can say this, goddammit, I swear to God. I'm sorry, guys, I'm kind of tired. I just got off something very stupid and I'm very irritated still. Okay, little motes and seeds drifted around in the sunlight. If this is a hallucination, he thought, it's pretty damn high-res.
Right, because that's totally something you can measure against.
Are you having a drug experience?
You might be, and you also have other drug experiences apparently to compare it to.
All right. The silence was the strangest part of it. As hard as he listened, he couldn't hear a single car. It felt like he was in a movie where the soundtrack had abruptly cut out. Soundtrack. It's literally 2 words, because soundtrack can't be 1 word, because that would be weird. A pair of French doors rattled a few times and then opened. A tall, fat man wearing a seerseeker suit strode out onto the terrace.
I think
Good
it's
afternoon,
Sucker.
he said. You would be Quentin Coldwater. He spoke very correctly, as if he wished he had an English accent, but wasn't quite pretentious enough to affect one. He had a mild, open face and thin blonde hair. Yes, sir?
Where we didn't mention his attractiveness at all. We just described him impartially as because of yes.
So are we saying that Quentin might be bi?
I don't know. I wasn't really saying any of it. I was just going,
I mean, because, well, I was going with that vein where we established earlier, where we were talking about this going, he goes into a lot of detail about the women, but suddenly he went into a strange amount of detail about this other guy, but mostly to basically be like, but you're not, you have a weird face.
He's the first man he went into great detail about.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so maybe he's into him.
Maybe. Consider what you told me happens later. It's possible.
It's possible.
Okay. Well, we won't talk about that, though. That's
nope, no spoilers.
No, we never do that.
Never spoilers. All right,
Quentin had never called an adult, or anybody else, sir in his life, but it suddenly felt appropriate. Welcome to Brakebills College, the man said. I
trying to be
you've
British.
Heard of us.
Trying to be more British than he was.
Actually, no, Quentin said. Well, you've been offered a preliminary exam here. Do you accept? Quentin didn't know what to say. This wasn't one of the questions he'd prepped for when he got up this morning. I don't know, he said, blinking. I mean, I guess I'm not sure. Perfectly understandable response, but not an acceptable one, I'm afraid. I need a yes or no. It's just for the exam, he added, helpfully. Quentin had a powerful intuition that if he said no, all of this would be over before the syllable was even fully out of his mouth, and he would be left standing out in the cold rain and dog shit of First Street, wondering why he'd seemed to feel the warmth of the sun on the back of his neck for a second just then. He wasn't ready for that.
That's a very specific,
Not
strong impression, honestly.
I know!
It's one of those things where someone coming in and going, I will slap you with a wet tuna from the nets of Ursula down in the west trenches of the Northland. You're going, that's really specific, you know.
Here in the Marianas Trench will merge forth with the Underland, and you will thereby discover that Alice indeed was on crack. You know?
And it's just one of those weird things of going, this is oddly specific.
Yep.
Going, I feel like this very specific detailed thing will happen, which is fine, but I was like, it's a little wild.
It's fine. It's fine.
It's fine. It's just fine.
It's fine. It's fine. Not yet. Sure, okay, he said, not wanting to sound too eager. Yeah. Split. He was one of those superficially jolly people whose jolliness didn't quite reach all the way up to his eyes. Let's get you examined. My name is Henry Fogg. No jokes, please. I've heard them all. You may address me as Dean. Henry Fogg?
Henry Fogg.
What would you say?
Foghorn, fog jokes, you know, oh, your name's Fogg?
Okay.
I don't know.
That's I'm entirely kind of like...
That would be my assumption of what the jokes are.
I don't know either. I've heard them all. You may address me as Dean. Follow me. You're the last one to arrive, I think. He added. No jokes actually came to Quentin's mind.
Yeah,
also,
see, he didn't have that problem too.
He is not a black person in this either.
They didn't say that.
But
that's okay. They added more racial diversity explicitly in the
in the show.
In the show,
but
as far as I can tell.
But the thing is he had a mild open face and thin blonde hair. I highly fucking doubt that he is a person of color.
If he's got thin blonde hair,
yeah, that would be very
seems
unusual. We're not an anime character here. We are actually.
Hey, we don't know. Maybe he bleaches his thin blonde hair.
Look at my thin blonde hair!
I bleach it. It's beautiful.
This stuff is so hard.
It's a pain every time.
Yeah, good job. I'm sorry. Complete silence. We got this.
We got this.
All right.
It's fine. Go ahead. Read away.
No jokes actually came to Quentin's mind. Inside the house, it was hushed and cool, and there was a rich, spicy smell in the air of books and oriental carpets and old wood and tabacco. The dean walked ahead of him impatiently. It took Quentin a minute for his eyes to adjust. They hurried through a sitting room hung with murky oil paintings, down a narrow wood-paneled hallway, then up several flights of stairs to a heavy timbered wooden door. The instant it opened, hundreds of eyes flicked up and fixed themselves on Quentin.
Because they've all been watching every person coming into this room, and they're suddenly like, there's another one! Poof! Because they're all just
They're
as confused as he
panicking.
is, except for they're not. They're all just as worried, though, for various reasons. Some
Yes.
more informed than he.
It's true. The room was long and airy and full of individual wooden desks arranged in rows. At each desk sat a serious-looking teenager. It was a classroom, but not the kind Quentin was used to, where the walls were cinder block and covered with bulletin boards and posters with kittens hanging from branches with "Hang in there, baby!" under them in balloon letters. The walls of
Are we sure it's not in Comic Sans?
I mean, the Comic Sans would make more sense to me, because actually, so one of the things people might not know about Comic Sans is actually very useful for people who have difficulties reading.
Dyslexia specifically.
Dyslexia specifically, yes. It is actually very helpful. So if you have any problems, or anybody you know that has issues with that, I would actually encourage them to maybe, if they can, change their font usages to Comic Sans.
Or to Dyslexia, which is specifically designed to be more for dyslexia in the same vein as Comic Sans.
But I'm saying if you can't get a hold of it, Comic Sans tends to be more available.
It really is. It's very good.
It actually was designed to be readable.
And if you find yourself reading very, very slowly because you have troubles parsing things, even if it's minor dyslexia, Comic Sans is a great way to
Especially sometimes you'll actually run into that simply because you're more tired. That actually can be very helpful. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing actually really wrong with Comic Sans, and I've been kind of ashamed where I only casually got on basically the Comic Sans hating train because everybody seemed to dislike it so much.
Going, oh my god, they want to do everything in Comic Sans.
It looks so terrible, blah, blah, blah. It looks super dorky, but it's like actually Comic Sans is just readable. Much more readable than basically like Times New Roman or any of the Arial or any of the other ones that we use more often.
Yep.
So anyway.
All right, go ahead.
Let's see.
Everyone had stared at him. Balloon letters on the kitten poster.
Oh, it's because it skipped. There we go. On the balloon letters. The walls of his room, of this room, were old stone. It was full of sunlight, and it stretched back and back and back. It looked like a trick with mirrors. Most of the kids were Quentin's age, and appeared to occupy his same general stratum of coolness or lack thereof. But not all. There were a few punks with mohawks or shaved heads, and there was a substantial Goth contingent, and one of those super Jews, a Hasid.
A super Jew.
A super Jew? Wow.
A super Jew.
Holy shit.
Might say something about his upbringing that I don't know what is, but I'm sure it does.
I don't even know. A too-tall girl with two big red frame glasses beamed goofily at everyone. A few of the younger girls looked like they'd been crying. One kid had no shirt on, and green and red tattoos all over his back. Jesus, Quentin thought. Whose parents would let them do that? Another was in a motorized wheelchair. Another was missing his left arm. He wore a dark button-down shirt with one sleeve folded up and held closed with a silver clasp. All of the desks were identical, and on each one an ordinary blue test booklet, blank blue test booklet, sorry, I was losing the phone here, was laid out with a very thin, very sharp number 3 pencil next to it. It was the very first thing Quentin had seen here that was familiar. There was one empty seat. What is this? Hang on, guys. My phone is doing weird stuff, and it's
so Scandal is reading this on a library app called Overdrive.
Mm-hmm. And the light keeps going weird on me, where it's really bright and then it'll dim, bright and dim, and bright and dim, and I'm going, what are you doing? Stop it!
It's
really
having
distracting.
trouble interpreting the room lighting.
So
we shall forward forth with better technological
I think I'm gonna turn
success.
it off, actually, because it's driving me nuts. Okay. Let's see. There was one empty seat toward the back of the room, and he sat down and scooched his chair forward with a deafening screech.
Scooch?
He almost thought he saw Julia's face in among the crowd, but she turned away almost immediately, and anyway, there was no time. At the front of the room, Dean Fogg cleared his throat primly. "All right," he said, "a few preliminaries. There will be silence during the examination. You are free to look at other students' papers, but you will find that they appear to you to be blank. Your pencils will not require additional sharpening. If you would like a glass of water, just hold up 3 fingers above your head. Like this," he demonstrated. "Do not worry about feeling unprepared for the examination."
3 fingers like this, and we'll make the sign of the rebellion from, Katniss.
It's the Weebelow.
Oh, it's
I have always had problems with it going, "Look, Weebelows." Like, they were like, "It's super serious." I'm like, "Weebelows."
Or it's literal American Sign Language of hold up 3 fingers for water. I'm like, you could have just...
You could have done that.
You could literally just be using American Sign.
It's true. Alright, actually, I think it's a setting in the app, and it's freaking driving me nuts.
Alright,
screen timeout. Thank you for freaking telling me about that. I actually didn't know this existed.
No,
because
well,
I never listen to ebooks. Or listen to ebooks. What I do is listen to audiobooks.
you don't read them yourself. We listen to audiobooks for the most part.
Because I don't have a lot of time.
One day, recording audiobooks.
Ooh, I'm excited.
All right, go ahead.
All right. Do not worry about feeling unprepared for the examination. There is no way to study for it, though it would be equally true to say that you have been preparing for it your whole lives. There are only two possible grades, pass and fail. If you pass, you will proceed to the second stage of the examination. If you fail, and most of you will be returned to your homes with a plausible alibi and very little memory of this entire experience.
Very little memory. Some memory, but very little.
The duration of the test is 2.5 hours. Begin. The dean turned to the blackboard and drew a clock face on it. Quentin looked down at his blank booklet on his desk. It was no longer blank. It was filling with questions, the letters literally swarming into being on the paper as he watched. The room filled with a collective rustling of paper like a flock of birds taking off. Heads bowed in unison. Quentin recognized this motion. It was the motion of a bunch of high-powered Type A test killers getting down to their bloody work. All right.
We'll murder some tests
one of them.
Together.
Quentin hadn't planned on spending the rest of his afternoon, or morning, or whatever this was, taking a standardized test on an unknown subject, at an unknown educational institution in some unknown alternate climactic zone. Yep, it is climactic zone, where it was still summer. He was supposed to be in Brooklyn, freezing his ass off, and being interviewed by some random senior citizen, currently deceased. But the logic of his immediate circumstances was overwhelming his other concerns, however well-founded they might be. He had never been one to argue with logic. A lot of the test was calculus. Basic stuff for Quentin, who was so mysteriously good at math that his high school had been forced to outsource that part of his education to Brooklyn College. Nothing more hazardous than some fancy differential geometry and a few linear algebra proofs. But there were more exotic questions, too. Some of them seemed totally pointless. One of them showed him the back of a playing card. Not an actual playing card, but a drawing of the back of a playing card, mind you, featuring your standard twin angels riding bicycles, and asked him to guess what card it was. How did that make sense? Or later on, the test gave him a passage from The Tempest, then asked him to make up a fake language, and then translate that Shakespeare into the made-up language. He was then asked questions about the grammar and orthography of his made-up language, and then, honestly, what was the point? Questions about the made-up geography and culture and society of the made-up country where his made-up language was so fluently spoken. Then he had to translate the original passage from the fake language back into English, paying particular attention to any resulting distortions in grammar, word choice, and meaning. Seriously. He always gave everything he had on tests, but in this case, he wasn't totally sure what he was supposed to give.
And in this case, I actually liked some of this, and I found it really interesting, but I feel like they don't follow through on it at all. So, especially, and I haven't gotten to the full distance of where it could pay off, but I feel like a lot of what they're describing in this test really could be things like we're trying to see if you have an aptitude for seeing other things. Are you perceiving an actual language that exists somewhere? Or how good are your memory skills, as well as how well can you construct things? And honestly, if you did construct this language, are you magically constructing it in a functional way? Like that these are basically tests to see what kind of magic you can do, as well as what your intelligence is.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it hasn't paid off in the book yet, even later on, because they seem to have trouble identifying people's type of magic even after this test, so I get a little confused in that area.
Well, you're not that far along, so I guess maybe also part of the point, too, since this book seems very hard to be trying to basically give a middle finger to Harry Potter, of basically trying to show off how hard this actually would be.
They do dig into basically how much work it is to learn the magic in here, like really hard. Like it's not fun, it's not silly, it's not lighthearted. You work your ever-living tush off.
Mm-hmm. Your ass is grass.
Is gone.
Mm-hmm.
There are no good butts at break bills. They've all been worked off.
Pretty much. I mean, they're work it too much. The test also changed as he took it. The reading comprehension sections showed him a paragraph that vanished as he read it, then quizzed him on its contents. Some kind of computerized paper. Hadn't he read somewhere that somebody was working on that? Digital ink? Amazing resolution, though. He was asked to draw a rabbit that wouldn't keep still as soon as he drew it. As soon as it had paws, it scratched itself luxuriously and then went hopping off around the page, nibbling at the other questions, so that he had to chase it with a pencil to finish filling in the fur. He wound up pacifying it with some hastily sketched radishes and then drawing a fence around it to keep it in line. Soon he forgot about everything else except putting in a satisfactory chunk of his neat handwriting next to one question after another, appeasing whatever perverse demands the test made on him. It was an hour before he even looked up from his desk. His ass hurt. He shifted in his chair.
Oh.
The patches of sunlight from the windows had moved. Something else had changed, too. When he'd started, every single desk had been filled. But now there was a sprinkling of empty ones. He hadn't noticed anybody leaving. A cold crystal seed of doubt formed in Quentin's stomach. Jesus, I must have finished already. He wasn't used to being outclassed in the classroom. The palms of his hands prickled with sweat, and he smeared them along his thighs. Who were these people? When Quentin flipped to the next page of the test booklet, it was blank except for a single word in the center of the page. Fin, in swirling italic type, like the end of an old movie. He sat back in the chair and pressed the heels of his aching hands against his aching eyes. Well, that was 2 hours of his life he'd never get back. Quentin still hadn't noticed anybody getting up and walking out, but the room was getting seriously depopulated. There were maybe 50 kids left, and more empty desks than full ones. It was like they were softly and silently slipping out of the room every time he turned his head. The punk with the tattoos and no shirt was still there. He must have finished, or given up, because he was dicking around by ordering more and more glasses of water. His desktop was crowded with glasses. Quentin spent the last 20 minutes staring out the window and practicing a spinning trick with his pencil. The dean came in again and addressed the room. "I'm delighted to inform you all that you will be moving on to the next stage of testing," he said. "This stage will be conducted on an individual basis by members of the faculty. In the meantime, you may enjoy some refreshment and converse amongst yourselves." Quentin counted only 22 desks still occupied, maybe a tenth of the original group. Bizarrely, a silent, comically correct butler in white gloves entered and began circulating through the room. He gave each of them a wooden tray with a sandwich, roasted red peppers, and a very fresh mozzarella on sourdough bread, a lumpy pear, and a thick of dark, bitter chocolate. He poured each student a glass of something cloudy and fizzy from an individual bottle without a label. It turned out to be grapefruit soda. Sounds gross.
Sounds gross for my friend who doesn't like grapefruits or most citrus things.
It's true, which is really weird because I do like a lot of citrus things, but apparently there are lots of citrus things I also don't like.
There are a lot more that you don't like, but specifically grapefruit is right out.
A grapefruit is right out.
Grapefruit is right out.
Right out. Quentin took his lunch and drifted up to the front row, where most of the rest of the test takers were gathering. He felt pathetically relieved to have gotten this far, even though he had no idea why he'd passed and the others had failed, or what he'd get for passing. The butler was patiently loading the clinking, sloshing collection of water glasses from the punk's desk onto a tray. Quentin looked for Julia, but either she hadn't made the cut, or she'd never been there in the first place. "Should have capped it," explained the punk, who said his name was Penny. He had a gentle, moony face that was at odds with his otherwise terrifying appearance. "How much water can you ask for? Like 5 glasses at most? I love finding shit like that, where the system screws itself with its own rules." He shrugged. "Anyway, I was bored. The test told me I was done after 20 minutes. 20 minutes? Quentin was torn between admiration and envy. Jesus Christ, it took me 2 hours! The punk shrugged again and made a face. "What the hell do you want me to say?"
I'm like, I can't help you, dude.
Too bad. Among the test takers, camaraderie warred with mistrust. Some of the kids exchanged names and hometowns and cautious observations about the test. Though the more they compared notes, they realized that none of them had taken the same one. They were from all over the country, except for the 2 who turned out to be from the same Inuit reservation in Saskatchewan. They went around the room telling stories about how they'd gotten here. No 2 were exactly the same, but there was always a certain family resemblance. Somebody went looking for a lost ball in an alley, or a strayed goat in a drainage ditch, or followed an inexplicable extra cable in the high school computer room, which led to a server closet that had never been there before. And then green grass and summer heat and somebody to take them up to the exam room. As soon as lunch was over, teachers began poking their heads in and calling out the names of candidates. They went alphabetically, so it was only a couple of minutes before a stern woman in her 40s with dark shoulder-length hair summoned Quentin Coldwater. He followed her into a narrow, wood-paneled room with tall windows that looked out from a surprisingly great height onto the lawn he'd crossed earlier. Chatter from the adjacent exam room cut off abruptly when the door closed. 2 chairs faced each other across a worn, hugely thick wooden table. Quentin felt giddy, like he was watching the whole thing on TV. It was ridiculous, but he forced himself to pay attention. This was a competition, and he dominated competitions. It was what he did, and he sensed that the stakes of this one were rising. The table was bare, except for a deck of cards and a stack of about a dozen coins. I understand. You like magic tricks, Quentin? The woman said. She had a very slight accent. European, but otherwise unplaceable. Icelandic? Why don't you show me some? As a matter of fact, Quentin did like magic tricks. His interest in magic had started 3 years ago, partly inspired by his reading habits, but mostly as a way of fattening up his extracurriculars with an activity that would force him to actually interact with other people. Quentin had spent hundreds of emotionally arid hours with his iPod on palming coins and shuffling cards and producing fake flowers from skinny plastic canes in a trance of boredom. He watched and rewatched grainy, porn-like instructional videotapes in which middle-aged men demonstrated close-up magic passes in front of backdrops made of bedsheets. Magic, Quentin discovered, wasn't romantic at all. It was grim and repetitive and deceptive. He worked his ass off and became very good at it.
Because he loves grim and repetitive and quiet and grindy, and he just doesn't like to admit it because he hides in it.
Pretty much. There was a store near Quentin's house that sold magic supplies, along with junk electronics, dusty board games, pet rocks, and fake vomit. Ricky, the man behind the counter, who had a beard, had sideburns but no mustache, was like an Amish farmer. Like an Amish farmer, grudgingly agreed to give Quentin some tips. It wasn't long before the student surpassed the master. At 17, Quentin knew the scotch and soda and the tricky one-handed Charlie cut, and he could juggle the elusive Mills Mess pattern with 3 balls and sometimes, for short, ecstatic flights, with 4. He earned a small dividend of popularity at school every time he demonstrated his ability to throw, with fierce, robotic accuracy, an ordinary playing card sidearm so that from a distance of 10 feet it stuck edge-on in one of the flavorless, styrofoamy apples they served in the cafeteria. Quentin, they must be Gala. Quentin reached for the cards first.
Or it could be one of those, it could honestly be a Red Delicious.
Gala and Red Delicious are really bad. Red Delicious is, I think, the worst, though.
Red Delicious, to me, has, like, the least amount of flavor of almost any apple, which is sad, other than, like, Golden Delicious.
Right? Well, it's one of those things, actually, where I think is really sad, learning the story about Red Delicious, where the thing is they went very heavily for color. So, like with roses used to smell a lot more than they do now. The reason why, though, is because we bred them so hard going appearance is the only thing that matters. So, roses gradually in stores lost all of their smell, the one that they sell, and so did Red Delicious. Red Delicious is literally about appearance.
Interesting.
Yep, and I learned that, and I was like, well, that makes way more sense, because you really kind of seem kind of garbagey.
Because you have very little flavor a lot of times. Now, it depends on where they're grown specifically. Some are juicier and have more flavor, but by and large, they're very benign thing palate-wise. That one.
Yeah, they're just
gross. Very little going on.
No, boo.
It's all right. Go ahead.
I was talking to you. I'm sorry.
Go for it.
Okay. All right, let's see. Quentin reached for the cards first. He was vain about his shuffling, so he broke out a faro shuffle rather than the standard riffle, just in case. Fat chance. The woman sitting across from him knew the difference, and how ridiculously hard it was to do a good faro. He ran through his usual routine, which was already calculated to show off as many different skills as possible. False cuts, false shuffles, lifts, slates, passes, forces. In between tricks, he tossed and waterfalled and avalanched the cards from hand to hand. He had a regular patter to go with it, but it sounded clumsy and empty in this quiet, airy, beautiful room, in front of this dignified, handsome older woman.
The first woman he hasn't described in great detail at all.
At all, actually. The words.
Because if they're not hot, you guess they just don't get described.
Right, except for the fact that he does actually say she's this handsome older woman, but...
Now, but it took him that long to get there. He already described her once.
Right? He performed. The words trailed off. He performed in silence. The cards made shushing, snapping noises in the stillness. The woman watched him steadily, obediently choosing a card whenever he asked her to, showing no surprise when he recovered it, against all odds, from the middle of a thoroughly shuffled deck, or from his shirt pocket, or out of thin air. He switched to the coins. They were fresh, new nickels, nicely milled, good crisp edges. He had no props, no cups, or folded handkerchiefs, so he stuck to palms and passes, flourishes, and caches. The woman watched him in silence for a minute, then reached across the table and touched his arm. "Do that one again," she said. He obediently did that one again. The trick was an old one, the wandering nickel, wherein a nickel, actually 3 nickels, moved mysteriously from hand to hand. He kept showing it to the audience, then cheekily vanishing it again, then pretended to lose track of it entirely. He then triumphantly produced it again, whereupon it appeared to vanish again straight out of his open palm in plain sight. It was actually fairly ordinary, if well scripted, a sequence of steals and drops, with one particularly nervy retention of vision vanish. "Do it again." He did it again. She stopped him in the middle. "This part. There is a mistake." "Where?" He frowned. "That's how you do it." She pursed her lips and shook her head. The woman plucked 3 nickels from the stack, and without an instant of hesitation, or anything in her manner that acknowledged she was doing something special, performed the wandering nickel perfectly. Quentin couldn't stop staring at her small, limber brown hands. Her movements were smoother and more precise than any professional's he'd ever seen. She stopped in the middle. "See here, where the second coin must go from hand to hand. You need a reverse pass, holding it like so. Here, come around, so you can see." He obediently trotted around to her side of the table and stood behind her,
Riveted.
trying not to look down her blouse.
And now we're back to sex.
And we just can't get away from it.
He can't. If there are boobs in the room, he has a really hard time. If
He
he's
really
acknowledged
does.
them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he has quite the challenge.
Again, I don't know whether I should like this character or hate the crap out of this character. Like, is this the point of the author being like, "Yes, see, I told you"? I'm like, but...
Are we supposed to dislike him because he's ogling every woman he spends more than a couple seconds with?
Right.
Or trying not to ogle because he has some actual sort of issue with himself?
Right?
Going, do you have an issue with yourself with this?
Like, what's going on?
You really have trouble if you're standing behind someone not looking down their blouse?
Like, really?
Like, you're fascinated by this magic trick and boobs are more distracting than something that's your passion?
Right? Something that you, like, were like, "Well, I'll just fucking do it. Watch me,
And
man,
also,
I'm
you've
brilliant."
been more impressed with her doing it than anyone you've ever seen, and yet you're instantly distracted by boobs or the possibility of
tits.
boobs.
Yep.
Like, that's wild to me.
Isn't that, again, sometimes that feel of going, this sounds made up.
No, no, dang it.
No.
All right,
Anyway.
go ahead. So, boobs. She performed it beautifully. Has him come around.
Yeah, exactly.
Come around, my dear.
Come around, my darling dear. Her hands were smaller than his, but the nickel vanished between her fingers like a bird into a thicket. She did the move for him slowly, backward and forward, breaking it down. "That's what I'm doing," he said. "Show me." Now she was openly smiling. She grasped his wrist to stop him mid-pass. "Now, where is the second coin?" He held out his hands, palm up. The coin was... But there was no coin. It was gone. He turned his hands over, waggled his fingers, looked on the table, in his lap, on the floor. Nothing. It had disappeared. Did she nick it while he wasn't looking? With those fast hands and that Mona Lisa smile, he couldn't quite put it past her. "It is what I thought," she said, standing up. "Thank you, Quentin. I will send in the next exam."
I love the implication here that he's doing magic while doing a trick without realizing that he's doing magic to make himself better at the trick.
Right?
Going, I'm actually vanishing this, but I don't even know that I'm vanishing this because I've just convinced myself that I'm doing the trick well.
Right?
And she's
Spoilers,
going,
there's actual magic.
and she's going, "You're literally doing actual magic to get away with this." And he's like, "No, I'm just really good at this trick." And she's like, No, I don't believe you for a second. You aren't."
Right? Quentin watched her go, still patting his pockets for the missing coin. For the first time in his life, he couldn't tell if he'd passed or failed. The whole afternoon went like that, professors parading in through one door and out the other. It was like a dream, a long, rambling dream with no obvious meaning. There was an old man with a shaky head who fumbled in his pants pockets and threw a bunch of frayed, yellowed, knotted cords on the table, then stood there with a stopwatch as Quentin untied them. A shy, pretty woman, who looked like she was barely older than Quentin, asked him to draw a map of the house and the grounds based on what he'd seen since he'd been here. A slick fellow with a huge head and who wouldn't or couldn't stop talking challenged him to a weird variant of blitz chess. After a while, you couldn't even take it seriously. It felt like it was his credulity that was being tested. A fat man with red hair and a self-important air released a tiny lizard with iridescent hummingbird wings and huge, alert eyes into the room. The man said nothing, just folded his arms and sat on the edge of the table, which creaked unhappily under his weight. For the lack of a better idea, Quentin tried to coax the lizard to land on his finger. It flew down and nipped a tiny chunk out of his forearm, drawing a dot of blood, then zipped away and buzzed against the window like a bumblebee. The fat man silently handed Quentin a band-aid, collected his lizard, and
walked
left.
out.
Finally, the door closed and didn't open again.
So tell me, have they described one woman unflatteringly so far versus the men who have been described as such?
No, not at all.
Not at all. They either don't describe them at all, or they describe them in a flattering manner, or they describe them blandly and then in more detail once it can be flattering.
All right. I don't know what's going on.
That's
so basically,
what I'm
he
getting.
sounds also potentially like super hypersexual?
Maybe, or they're just hyper nervous about women in general, and so therefore hyper aware of their appearances.
Yeah,
And
maybe.
if he's weighing all of basically how he perceives them to be weighing him against what he perceives their attractiveness to be, you know, how available socially or even sexually or romantically they might be to him, then their attractiveness level is very, very important to him, even based on how's this conversation going to go.
All right.
That's
Which is,
a
again,
lot to think about. It's
very frustrating.
very anxiety-inducing.
Yeah, but again, also incredibly frustrating of going, this is what you care about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's definitely a level of, really?
Uh-huh.
5 more. Whoops.
Whoop. Almost there. So close.
So close.
Ooh, we're getting a fox in this. Great.
We are.
Okay. Quentin took a deep breath and rolled his shoulders. Apparently the procession had ended, though nobody bothered to say anything to Quentin. At least he had a few minutes to himself. By now he could see the sun was setting, but he couldn't see it from the exam room. Excuse me, I put a button there when I saw it there. He couldn't see it from the exam room, but he could see a fountain, and the light reflected in the pool of the fountain was a cool, burnt orange. A mist was rising up through the trees. The grounds were deserted. He rubbed his face with his hands. His head was clearing. It occurred to him, long after it probably should have, to wonder what the hell his parents were thinking.
Right?
Normally, they were pretty indifferent to his comings and goings, but even they had their limits. School had been out for hours now. Maybe they thought his interview had run long, though the chances that they even remembered Quentin was supposed to have an interview were pretty small.
It's interesting how disinterested his parents are in his extraordinary schooling career.
Right? Going, well, this is just expectation.
The expectation is just that you will be a remarkable student, that you will be a remarkable child, and that that's ordinary, so not remarkable at all.
Which
That,
is
yes,
also...
of course, you would be as good as everyone else. That's just normal. You need to be more than outstanding.
Which people
more.
have... people have actually talked about socially, if we're going, once you're used to this thing, say like you're used to your child always having an enormous lexicon of, you know, linguistics knowledge and basically an awareness of whatever the heck you think is important, or you can even freaking access, you just go, yeah, that's my child, why not?
And also,
And everybody else
that
going,
is
holy
now
shit!
what I expect from them, and is no longer special.
Pretty much.
And that doesn't happen with everyone. Some people continue to go, child, you're brilliant. This is still special and valuable and cool. And other people go, no, that's the new standard. So that's what you need to be all the time.
Mm-hmm, all the time. And I'm not going to engage in basically your process or what's going on at all, other than going, well, why aren't you getting any better?
Yep, and you need to continue to get better, which is the problem with child geniuses a
Oh,
lot.
gifted kids? I was one of those. That child going, oh, you're so brilliant, you're so good at this. Why are you so good at language? Why are you so good at basically English composition? Why are you so good at reading? Why are you so good at the English part of this
You know what's
thing,
really
right?
funny about the difference between myself and Scandal
Hmm.
is that I was a disabled student. I had the special ed and the special learning and the special help. I was in remedial math and remedial reading, and I was never considered anything notable other than that I needed way more support than everyone. And this was an advanced student over here.
But only in certain areas, for sure. But yeah, that which is something I've always laughed about too, because at least when I met you, I was very disoriented, being like, you are very highly intelligent and very capable and whatever else. You're very good at what you're doing, but you're also incredibly isolated.
Yes.
Because, unfortunately, in the circumstances that at least you were involved in when I met you, were
really
not.
Limited as far as my exposure to things.
Yeah, and you seemed far more comfortable to have that, but I think also the thing was is that you really didn't want it. Either.
I didn't know what else to have. I have a problem with being obligated to people. I'm working on it. But it has pervaded my life.
It's true.
It's true.
It's true.
It's true. At any rate.
Anyway.
Children. Forward ahead.
We're going to get... They said... Or, if it was summer here, maybe school hadn't even started yet? The giddy haze he'd been lost in all afternoon was starting to dissipate. He wondered exactly how safe he was here. If this was a dream, he was going to have to wake up pretty soon.
How safe he was here. He's not really having any kind of a profound experience of going, holy crap, this is magic. He's having more of a, I'm anxious because this is testing. How come I'm not familiar with this? I should be familiar with the pieces of this that I'm not familiar with. What the heck? And also going, I'm baffled. Are they just mocking me? Not a, oh my god, the stuff moves on the paper.
But the thing that I am supposed to be good at, the thing that I am supposed to just comprehend and understand, like you said, this is what we are good at, is destroying tests, is being these, things that hunt and destroy these things. These are just, this is the same thing as it's always been.
It's our prey.
Except it's not. Something's going very wrong. There's something very weird about all of this. What's going on? Alright. Through the closed door, he distinctly heard the sound of somebody crying. A boy, and way too old to be crying in front of other people.
Because that's how things are when you get to... That's the toxic masculinity piece showing up for the first time.
In a while.
Yep. Anyway, go ahead. Because you can totally tell someone's age by how they cry.
You do. I mean, there are some people, you listen to them cry and you go, God, I cannot tell how old you are.
I just found that was interesting, of going, that I have marked their age by how they cry. And I'm going, you're too old to cry in front of people, which is a really harmful idea.
Yeah.
Because it means you can no longer share that part of yourself
or express
with
yourself.
anyone.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to express yourself in that way, and you're going to have feelings that would drive you to tears, that they have to be only for you, and you can never have sympathy, commiseration, or support from someone else.
Yeah, it's just inevitable. You're just gonna, that's what you need to put these down. They are childish. Crying is being childish.
Unless you're doing it by yourself and no one knows, and then you might not be doing it at all, so it should be fun.
They won't talk about it, yeah.
Because it doesn't exist if no one knows about it. It can't be talked about. Alright, go ahead.
Anyway, a teacher was speaking to him quietly and firmly, but the boy either wouldn't or couldn't stop. He ignored it, but it was a dangerous, unmanning sound, a sound that clawed away at the outer layers of Quentin's hard-won teenage sang-froid. Underneath it, there was something like fear. The voices faded as the boy was led away. Quentin heard the dean speaking in icy, clipped tones, trying not to sound angry. I'm not really sure I care one way or the other anymore. There was an answer, something inaudible. If we don't have a quorum, we'll simply send them all home and skip a year. Fogg's genteel reserve was decaying. Nothing would make me happier. We can rebuild the observatory. We can turn the school into a nursing home for senile old professors. God knows we have enough of those. Inaudible. There is a 20th, Melanie. We go through this every year. We will empty every high school and middle school and juvenile detention center until we find him or her or it. And if there isn't, I will happily resign, and it will be your problem, and you're welcome to it. Right now, I can't think of anything that would make me happier. The door opened a crack, and for an instant, a worried face peered in at him. It was Quentin's first examiner, the dark-haired European lady with the clever fingers. He opened his mouth to ask about a phone. His cell phone was down to one useless flickering bar. but the door was shut again. How
What?
annoying. Was it over? Should he just leave? He made a face to himself. It was all for adventures, God knows, but enough was enough. This one was getting old. The room was almost dark. He looked around for a light switch, but there wasn't one. In fact, all the time he'd been here, he hadn't seen a single electrical device. No phones, no lights, no clocks. It was a long time since Quentin had had his sandwich and his square of dark chocolate, and he was hungry again. He stood up and went to the window, where it was lighter. The panes of glass were wiggly with age. Was he the last one left? What was taking so long? The sky was a luminous royal blue dome, swarming with huge, lazy whorls of stars, Van Gogh stars that would have been invisible in Brooklyn, drowned in light pollution. He wondered how far upstate they were, and what had happened to the note he'd been chasing and never found. Now he wished he'd kept it with him. He imagined his parents making dinner together in the kitchen, something steaming in the stove, his dad singing along to something nightmarishly unhip, 2 glasses of red wine on the counter. He almost missed them.
Almost.
With no warning, the door banged open and the dean walked in, talking over his shoulder at somebody behind him. A candidate? Fine, he said sarcastically. Let's see a candidate, and bring some goddamned candles. Did you get it?
I get it.
It's time.
So we're going to interrupt briefly. If you're not watching the screen, we're going to buy the fox.
Yay, fox!
So here's the fox, and we are going to go play with them.
Yay! This much.
I don't know if this changes the mechanics.
Oop, the screen is different.
But we'll see. So hello, fox.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it will help me get currency to get the other creatures. Because the fox earns currency by earning lights.
It seems a little bit more responsive, or have you just gotten a little better? But it seems, honestly, like
It seems a little smoother, but I could be imagining things. He could have been programmed, the fox could have been programmed later and be a little smoother. Not sure. At any rate,
Anyway, that's super cool. Good job. Hey, good job, Liz.
Yay.
Hey, good for Liz. Write in the comments below and subscribe. No, the facts. Woo!
If you like the facts, please leave a comment. I am charmed at having finally acquired this individual, given that it was a long time of play to acquire that many flowers and to get skilled enough to acquire them regularly.
That is the one thing, actually, that we discussed very much so about this particular game, of going, this game is long,
slow,
and it's
meditative game. It is a game to be thoughtful. It is an endless runner at its core. And
however, it feels more like a slog than I would like, and this is definitely very different than the other one. This is a different path. If I had to guesstimate, that looks very different.
I mean, I've seen all of these things already, so
But not in that order.
they come in random orders. They are completely random. It is a random generated engine. I've never seen the same thing twice. Sometimes you get 2 things in quick succession. So I know it's
you've
random.
totally seen the same thing twice.
No, I've never seen the same full assembled path twice.
Oh.
It's
okay.
random.
That part. Okay, that makes sense.
Right. Anyway,
All right. Well,
if you would like to continue the book.
I'm going to continue. Here we go. He sat down at the table. His shirt was translucent with sweat. It was not impossible that he'd had a drink between now and the last time Quentin had seen him. Hello, Quentin. Please sit. He indicated the other chair. Quentin sat, and Fogg rebuttoned his top button and hastily, irritably, whipped a tie out of his pocket. The dark-haired woman followed Fogg into the room, and after her came the old man with the knots, the fat man with the lizard, and then the rest of the dozen or so men and women who had paraded through the room this afternoon. They formed lines along the walls, packed themselves into the corners, craning to look at him, whispering to one another. The punk kid with the tattoos was there too. He slipped in just as the door was closing, unobserved by the faculty. Come on, come on, the dean waved them into the room. We should really do this in the conservatory next year. Pearl, you come around here. To this, the young blonde woman who'd made Quentin draw a map. Now, he said, when they were all inside. Quentin, sit, please. Quentin was already sitting. He scooched in his chair a little farther. Dean Fogg took out of one pocket a fresh pack of cards, the plastic wrap still on them, and from the other he took a stack of nickels, maybe $1's worth, which he put down too emphatically so that they promptly slumped over. They both reached to restack them. All right, let's get to it. Fogg clapped his hands together and rubbed them together. Let's see some magic! He sat back in his chair and folded his arms. Hadn't they already done this part? Quentin kept his face studiously calm and unworried, but his mind was in free fall. Slowly, he unwrapped the stiff new cards, the plastic crackling deafeningly in excruciating stillness, and watched from a mental mile away as his hands dutifully riffled and bridged them, riffled and bridged. He searched for his brain for a trick he hadn't already done the first time around. Somebody coughed. He barely started his routine when Fogg stopped him. No. Fogg chuckled, not especially kindly. Not like that. I want to see some real magic. He knocked twice on the hard tabletop with his knuckles and sat back again. Quentin took a deep breath and searched Fogg's face for the good humor he'd seen there earlier, but Fogg just watched expectantly. His eyes were pale, milky blue, paler than eyes usually were. I don't really get what you mean, Quentin said slowly in the silence, like he'd
Not
forgotten his
connecting to the
line.
fact that the entire test was completely magic, and he was chasing a rabbit around it, and the ink changed.
Pretty much.
And it didn't really connect us solidly enough, at least not me, to the fact that he was trying to justify all of the experiences with, digital ink.
I know it has
Especially since he was writing with a pencil.
Right.
Anyway.
I mean, I did. That was, to me, it felt pretty obvious. Being like, well, he's just basically trying to come up with something because it doesn't make sense. What is a real rational person in our day and age going to do? Be like, oh, it's this thing that I've heard about, or it's that thing I've heard about, or, it's something that has to be my kind of logic.
As I said, I didn't connect to him doing that enough to go, I've explained away everything. Including a fairy lizard, which he didn't seem to try and explain away. He just tried to solve.
Be like, hey.
He didn't go, what? This is not something I've ever seen or heard of at all. It's just, it's a hummingbird lizard. It didn't seem like he was still trying to justify this experience of his reality.
He was totally just fine. He was totally involved. Anyway. Like he'd forgotten his line in the school play and had to ask for it. What do you mean, real magic? Well, I don't know. Fogg shot a hilarious sideways glance at the other teachers. I don't know what I mean. You tell me what I mean. Quentin shuffled a couple more times, stalling. He didn't know what to do. He would do anything if they would just tell him what he was supposed to do. This was it, he thought. He was coming to the end. This is what failure feels like. He looked around the room, but every face was either blank or avoiding his gaze. No one was going to help him. He was going back to Brooklyn. Maddeningly, he could feel tears pooling in his eyes. He blinked them away. He so badly wanted not to care, but he was falling backward, sinking down inside himself, and there was nothing there to catch him. This is it, he thought. This was the test he couldn't pass. It wasn't really all that surprising. He just wondered how long they were going to let it go on. Stop fucking with us, Quentin, Fogg barked. He snapped his fingers. Come on, wake up! He reached across the table and grabbed Quentin's hands roughly. The contact was a shock. His fingers were strong and strangely dry and hot. He was moving Quentin's fingers, physically forcing them into positions they didn't want to be in. Like this, he was saying. Like this! Like this! Okay, stop, Quentin said. He tried to pull away. Stop! But Fogg didn't stop. The audience shifted uncomfortably, and somebody said something. Fogg kept working Quentin's hands with both of his, kneading them. He bent Quentin's fingers back, stretching them apart so that the webs between his fingers burned. Light seemed to flash between their hands. I said stop it! Quentin jerked his hands away. It was surprising how good the anger felt. It was something to grab onto. In the shocked silence that followed, he took a deep breath and forced it out through his nose. When it was out, he felt like he'd expelled some of his despair with it. He'd had enough of being judged. He'd been sucking it up his whole life, but even he had his limit. Fogg was talking again, but now Quentin wasn't even listening. He had begun to recite something under his breath, something familiar. It took him a second to realize that the words he was mouthing weren't English. They were from the foreign language he had invented earlier that afternoon. It was an obscure language, he'd decided. Indigenous to a single tropical archipelago, a languorous hot weather paradise, a Gaudigan painting, blessed with black sand beaches and breadfruit trees and freshwater springs, and endowed with an angry, glowing red volcano god, and an oral culture rich in obscene explicatives. He spoke this language fluently, with no accent, like a native. The words he spoke were not a prayer, exactly, more of an incantation. Quentin stopped shuffling the cards. There was no going back. Everything snapped into very slow motion, as if the room had filled up with viscous but perfectly clear liquid, in which everyone and everything floated easily and calmly. Everyone and everything except for Quentin, who moved quickly, with Naruto Henjutsu.
Sorry, that's what these look like.
They
They do them on screen, when they did them in the show. The magic looks like Naruto Hanjutsus. It just does.
I laughed so hard I couldn't hold myself. I couldn't.
It ruined the suspension of disbelief really hard for my friend here.
I'm sorry.
I'm gonna force you to do Hanjutsus and yell, magic, my friend, do magic!
And I'm like, well, we just got a Naruto. How are we doing?
Alright, so we're gonna learn to do
Naruto
Hanjutsus.
Hanjutsu. Okay.
Sexy no jutsu comes next, then he can ogle his own breasts.
Woohoo! Titties! I need no one else. Good, I'm glad, because you need some help. Alright, with two hands together, as if he were releasing a dove, he tossed the deck of cards lightly up to the ceiling. The deck broke apart and scattered in flight, like a meteorite losing cohesion in the atmosphere, and as the cards fluttered back down to earth, they stacked themselves on the tabletop. They formed a house of cards. It was a recognizable, if impressionistic, model of the building they were sitting in. The cards fell as if by chance, but each one perfectly snapping magnetically into place. Snapping into place magnetically, edge to edge, one after the other. The last two, the aces of spades and hearts, leaned up against each other to make the roof over the clock tower.
Good
Now
job.
the room was absolutely still. Dean Fogg sat as if he were frozen in place. All the hairs were standing up on Quentin's arms, but he knew what he was doing. His fingers left almost imperceptible phosphorescent trails behind them in the air. He definitely felt high. He leaned forward and blew lightly on the card house, and it collapsed back down into a neatly stacked deck. He turned the deck over and fanned it out on the table like a blackjack dealer. Every card was a queen. All the standard suits, plus other suits that didn't exist, in different colors, green and yellow and blue. The Queen of Horns, the Queen of Clocks, the Queen of Bees, the Queen of Books. Some were clothed, some were shamelessly naked. Some of them had Julia's face, some of them had the lovely paramedics. Dean Fogg watched Quentin intently. Everybody watched him. Watch this. Quentin squared the deck again, and with no particular effort, ripped it in half, and then ripped the halves in half, and tossed the resulting confetti at the assembled company, who all flinched, except for Fogg.
Except for Fogg.
He stood up.
Fogg is the most badass.
His chair fell over backward. Tell me where I am, Quentin said softly. Tell me what I'm doing here. He picked up the stack of nickels in his fist. Only it was no longer a stack of coins. It was the hilt of a bright, burning sword that he drew easily out of the tabletop, as if it had been left there, buried up to the hilt. Tell me what's going on here, Quentin said louder to the room. And if this place isn't Fillory, then for fuck's sake, will somebody please tell me where the hell I am? Quentin let the tip of the sword hover under Fogg's nose for a slow 10 count. Then he reversed his grip and stabbed it down into the wood of the table. The point bit deep into the buttery wood and stuck there.
Back from whence you came, my sword.
Right. Except it didn't. Fogg didn't move. The sword waggled in place.
La la la.
La 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 la. Ooh, I feel a little impotent right now. Okay.
That's our fault.
Quentin sniffed involuntarily. The light of the last of the light from the window died. It was night. Well, now, the dean said finally.
That was lovely, because I just exited sunset and into night right as you read it.
That's beautiful. Good job, me. I planned it. That's brilliant all along. See, I just did magic.
Such magic.
He removed a neatly folded handkerchief from his pocket and patted his forehead. I think we can all agree that was a pass. Somebody, it was the old guy with the knots, put a reassuring hand on Quentin's back, gently, with surprising strength, drew the sword out of the table and laid it safely on its side. A slow patter of applause arose from the assembled examiners. It quickly turned into an ovation.
Good job. You finally did magic. We only had to abuse you first to get you to do it.
Yep, pretty much, because that's exactly how all magic works.
Because if we traumatize you enough, you'll finally snap, and then yay! Hurting you isn't important. The important part was that we finally proved you were magic.
We finally proved that you had the magicose abilities.
Yep. Disappearing one nickel subconsciously was not enough magic. You had to do more magic to be magic enough.
Oh, to magic cause.
Oops.
Fling!
Fling, goodbye.
Also, there's like, last game! You're like, really? I'll show you last game.
Well, I'm going to have the same last game as last time.
It's like practically the same exact
It is
spot.
exactly the same thing, except for it was a
super
completely different arrangement last time.
Yep, you bet.
All right, so is that the
That's
end of
the
that
end of
chapter?
that chapter, actually.
All right, so that was the end of chapter 2, and this was a revisiting of Fern Flower.
Yeah, and thank you for joining us for getting the fox. Good job, Lies.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, one of our, as I said, one of our very first Let's Plays was with Fern Flower, and we were really, really bad at it at that time, and I've gotten quite a bit better. I have not by any means mastered this game, but better enough to sort of work through and actually have, you know, some real enjoyment with the game based on skill. There's a lot of pretty things to see in this game that we didn't get to see in the first runs. We did, because really, as we labeled it an endless faller, we really did fall a lot. And a lot of our playthroughs or Let's Plays aren't about having incredible skill of something we've done 100 times. What they really are is about us trying something new and seeing what the game mechanics are, what the designers came up with, what the visual elements are, what the voice acting is like, what the sound profile is like, basically exploring the full experience of the game as much as possible. And with app games, a lot of them are very limited in that way, because they're meant to be simple in reference to what you get initially, and a lot of them are driven by premium currency when they're free games. And so they don't have a lot of continuing story a lot of times. App games are largely meant to be mindless and continuous. Some people even call them time wasters or time burners, where they really are there to sort of occupy you in time where you would otherwise be doing nothing. And in this case, this one's very soft and very quiet, and I find it very strongly meditative in that way, where it stays pretty and soft. There is no intensity to it, and while you encounter some pretty harrowing, challenges in reference to the actual architecture of the game, in reference to the cliffs you go to, that there is a lot going on here as far as the motifs are concerned. Every single one of the characters that is playable is also represented in the physiology of the game. See, there's the last game this time, different setup. And so you will see the fox occasionally, you will see the crow, you will see the doe, made up in the actual structures of these cliffs as you climb up everything.
Though I have to say,
endlessly.
I'm confused why we don't see the bat.
See, I think that is probably something I'm going to release later, sort of like the way the bison was released later.
But was there actually a bison?
The fox was the last character when we first downloaded this game.
Oh. Was it badger?
Unless
Was
I'm
it bison or was it badger?
Was the badger the last one? Whichever the last one was, after the fox. That one wasn't initially there when we downloaded
Yeah,
it.
no, I know that. So I was like, oh, who's that? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think honestly the last one might have just been the raven.
Okay.
But I don't really remember. We haven't really looked at it for a
Yeah,
while.
we could go back and watch our own Let's Play and find out. But yeah.
We never do that. We never keep things.
Nope.
We never, basically look at our own stuff and go, all right.
What did we do?
What did we actually do?
What did I actually say? What did I say? And one of the things that we actually do that is I enjoy a lot is Scandal and I, we do a lot of this for our own enjoyment. We're actually just hanging out with each other and sort of having fun, which is why we'll do sort of podcast style stuff as well as books, as well as just dissertations on things, as well as just checking games out and making really bad jokes and voice commentary sometimes, simply because it's something we enjoy for ourselves. I can't go back for it.
No, you can't.
No, I just missed it with the wind. So the wind is there to ride across large gaps, and that was a puzzle that I didn't solve in time. This is also a very challenging puzzle that I hadn't encountered on screen yet. You have to really get above the snow to make it, because the snow makes you jump a little bit less. So you can't quite do it otherwise. So really what you have to do is come up over here and get on the end of this peak. At least if I remember it correctly, because I know I've done this a couple of times and I've fought with it a whole lot trying to get up it before. This particular one is very challenging.
No, you know, no pressure or anything.
No, no pressure. At any rate, we're going to wrap this up here. Thank you for joining us for chapter 2 of The Magicians. Ha ha ha, not The Magician's Nephew. Ha. And not the Harry Potter where they're old enough. They aged them up, honestly, in the series. It was kind of funny how much they aged them up to basically go, and now they can all have sex because they're basically college age instead of older teens.
Right?
And everybody in there looks at least 20.
Yeah, it's a little weird to actually see The Magicians on
Screen?
On Netflix and go. But let alone, I really did strongly feel as if, I don't know, plot-wise, it's really not doing it for me.
That's okay.
It jumps a lot.
It jumps around quite a bit. We actually lost it between one episode and the next a couple of times, just going, what's going on here? How do these connect? At any rate, if you wanted to check out the rest of our channel, we do a lot of traditional Let's Plays as well, where we do, again, explore games and talk about them and sort of, you know, rate them, critique them, evaluate them, and we would love to have you along. See, there it was. There was the jump at the top of the peak. And I know there's probably an easier way to do that, but I haven't found it yet. And it really does. The snow shortens your jump so much that you really have to go on the black. So this is probably the most useful thing I could add to you on this game is all of these jumps are possible. Some of them just take a little more finesse to get through. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us. Yeah. If you would like, comment, subscribe, or anything else, I'm Laz.
And I am definitely Scandal.
And take care of yourselves out there.
Yeah, have fun, guys.
Bye.
Bye.